You are already feeling guilty for the action you are about to take. This person is close to you, perhaps too close, yet their presence steals your peace. Where there should be calm, there is chaos. You want to walk away, you want to cut them off, but your mind is restless, crowded with questions. What will people say? Will I regret this? Stay with me until the end. The clarity you seek is no longer hiding inside confusion. We've been taught that loyalty is a virtue, that blood is thicker than water, that cutting ties is an act of failure, that if you love someone hard enough, long enough, they will eventually change. But the Stoics saw something different, something clearer, something most people are too afraid to accept. Distance isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Every time you keep a door open for someone who walks through it to hurt you, you trade a part of your peace for a moment of familiarity. At first, it feels like comfort. It feels safe, even though it is chaos in disguise. We live in a world that forces you into staying, shames you into forgiving, and pressures you into maintaining connections that cost you your soul and your happiness. Here are 10 Stoic lessons that will change the way you handle relationships. 10 lessons that will teach you how to cut anyone off without any regrets, be it family, a friend, or anyone else, without feeling guilty. If you're ready to stop sacrificing your peace for other people's comfort, comment, "I choose peace" below. Let that be the declaration that ends the negotiation. Stop explaining your boundaries. Start enforcing them. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Guilt is not a moral compass. It's a mechanism. It's what happens when conditioning becomes a substitute for intuition. When the fear of being called selfish starts to feel more dangerous than the reality of being harmed, and the modern world didn't just allow this, it amplified it. Every movie, every song, every family gathering was built on one core narrative. Sacrifice is noble. Human beings are wired for connection. We always have been. But the difference between healthy connection and the trap you're living in now is that healthy connection requires reciprocity. Today, the system rewards your endurance regardless of the cost. Think about what that does to your psychology. You stay in the relationship because you've invested years. They respond with just enough warmth to keep you hooked. Suddenly, your brain registers a hit of hope. The same neurochemical cocktail that should only come from mutual respect. Researchers in behavioral psychology have studied this exact phenomenon. When you endure pain for a reward that rarely comes, your brain enters a state of intermittent reinforcement. The hunger that should be propelling you away gets partially fed, not by safety, but by the possibility of safety. You feel loyal without being valued, and that gap? That's where most people quietly suffer. The Stoics didn't have psychology, but they had something sharper: reason. Seneca watched people destroy themselves trying to fix broken relationships while living the opposite. Epictetus spent years teaching that some things are not up to us, and noticed that the most painful chains were rarely made of iron. They were made of expectation. The truly free moved differently. They assessed relationships based on virtue, not history. They guarded their inner peace the way a guardian guards a gate. Because that's exactly what your mind is, a gate. And you don't leave it open for anyone. But let's be honest about who benefits when you stay. Most of them don't realize what they're doing. They're not trying to drain your life or sabotage your potential. The enemy is the part of you that mistakes endurance for virtue, that confuses history with destiny, that has learned through years of social conditioning that being needed is almost as good as being respected. Almost. Except it isn't. Because being needed without being valued leaves a different residue than being valued without being needed. One feels like bondage, the other feels like freedom, and there's something else at play, something more insidious than guilt. When you maintain connections against your own well-being, your mental health, your spiritual growth, your new boundaries, you implicitly hand other people the authority to dictate your worth. You open yourself to the weight of their chaos. You invite the subtle erosion of your own standards from people who have never respected the path you're walking. You don't need their approval. You never did. But the moment you stay just to keep the peace, you've already conceded something important: your sovereignty, your right to leave without justification. Your life does not require a sacrifice. So what does it actually look like to cut ties without regret? It starts with 10 foundational shifts, 10 Stoic lessons that form the bedrock of a firmer, clearer way of living. Lesson 1. Blood is not a contract. Seneca wrote extensively about the nature of relationships. He distinguished between those we are born into and those we choose to keep. He understood that biology is an accident, but virtue is a choice. Just because someone shares your DNA doesn't mean they share your values. That's the first lesson. Your family is not a prison. They are people, and people must be evaluated by their actions, not their title. Every person you keep in your life based solely on obligation introduces a new variable: their chaos, their limitations, their disrespect. None of that belongs in the sanctuary of your mind. Keep it close. Protect it. Let virtue be the only requirement for access. Lesson 2. The cost of access. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire. He dealt with generals, politicians, and family members who plotted against him. He didn't engage them all. He didn't try to win them over. He assessed the cost of their presence to his own mission: peace of mind. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You don't owe anyone access to your energy." The person who demands your time without respecting your limits doesn't need your explanation. They need your boundary. Access is a privilege, not a right. When you stop giving unlimited access and start granting it based on respect, something fundamental shifts. The relationship becomes defined by reality, not history. The silence around your absence becomes its own protection. Nobody can disturb what nobody is allowed to touch. Lesson 3. Detachment without hatred. Here's something counterintuitive. When you cut someone off, you don't need to hate them. You don't need to burn bridges with fire. You just need to walk away and not look back. Epictetus taught that we should meet injuries not with rage, but with indifference. Rage implies you expect them to be different. Indifference implies you accept who they are and choose yourself anyway. Your instinct, conditioned by years of social training, will be to make a scene, to explain, to accuse. Resist it, because their reaction to your departure is information. It tells you whose love was conditional on your compliance, whose investment in your life was really about their control, not your well-being. Cato the Younger understood this instinctively. He didn't argue with fools. He removed himself from their presence. He didn't explain when action was clearer. And in doing so, he naturally separated the people who respected him from the people who merely wanted to use him. Your departure will do the same work. When you stop providing a running commentary on your exit, the people who truly belong in your circle will understand. Not because they agree with every move you make, but because they trust the person making the moves. And the ones who need constant drama, constant engagement, constant access, they'll fade. Let them. Their departure isn't a loss, it's a filter. There's a thread connecting all three of these lessons, and it runs deeper than strategy. It runs all the way down to self-preservation. When you treat blood as choice, assess the cost of access, and detach without hatred, you are doing something the Stoics considered the highest form of human work. You are building a self that doesn't depend on external validation to feel whole, a self whose value is intrinsic, not negotiated, not constructed from guilt and obligation and the approval of people who will be strangers in 5 years. You are becoming someone who moves from the inside out rather than the outside in. That's not just boundary setting, that's freedom. The first 3 lessons clear the ground. They remove the guilt, the obligation, the performance. But the next 3 go further. They don't just teach you what to stop doing. They show you how to execute the departure cleanly. Lesson 4. The sunk cost of emotion. Somewhere along the way, you learned that leaving means wasting the time you already invested. That walking away invalidates the years you spent trying. The Stoics would find this deeply strange. Seneca wrote about time as the only resource you never get back. Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est, he wrote. Everything else belongs to others. Time alone is ours. You are not obligated to spend more time fixing a broken past just because you spent time there already. A boundary stated clearly and calmly is complete. I'm leaving this relationship. That doesn't work for me. Full stop. No footnotes, no apology tour. When you add the explanation, you invite negotiation. And negotiation is how boundaries collapse. The person who respects your decision without needing the story is showing you something valuable about who they are. The person who demands you justify your freedom before deciding whether your limit is acceptable is showing you something equally valuable, something you should not ignore. Lesson 5. Protect the inner citadel. This one sounds obvious. It rarely gets practiced. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, taught that the mind is a fortress that must be guarded against external impressions. But in a world built on enmeshment, guilt trips, and the constant performance of loyalty, guarding the fortress has become seen as selfish. Everyone is loudly establishing their connection before they've done the work to protect their own peace. You don't have to play that game. When you let your inner citadel remain secure, something interesting happens. The chaos outside loses its power to disturb you. They carry weight that announcements never will. People don't remember what you said you were going to tolerate. They remember what you did. And when the gap between those two things is zero, when you consistently protect your peace without pre-announcing, your reputation becomes something nobody can manufacture with words alone. It becomes earned. Do the work. Then let the work introduce you. Lesson 6. Silence as a boundary. Modern life generates a constant invitation to explain. Opinions flood every channel. Drama cycles through your feeds like weather patterns. Predictable, recurring, oddly compelling. And every reaction, every response, every public engagement is a small leak. A tiny expenditure of the energy you need for the work that actually matters. Marcus Aurelius faced this at a scale most of us will never encounter. As emperor, he was surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His journals are full of one recurring practice, returning to what is actually within his control, not the opinions, not the gossip, not the noise, just the choices in front of him. In this moment, with the faculties he was given, you have the same choice every single day. The family group chat that's circulating drama, you don't have to engage with it. The confrontation that's calling for your participation, you don't have to answer it. The guilt inside a relationship you belong to, you don't have to become its fuel. None of this is indifference, it's discernment. There is a profound difference between someone who doesn't care and someone who has decided deliberately and with full clarity that their energy is too valuable to waste on noise that will mean nothing in 6 months. Silence in the face of pressure is not weakness. It is, as Epictetus would say, the clearest possible demonstration that you understand the difference between what is yours to control and what was never yours to begin with. That understanding is architecture. It is the structure on which a powerful, quiet life is built. 6 lessons in, and something is already shifting. You can feel it. The way distance begins to feel less like abandonment and more like preservation, less like isolation and more like focus. The 6 lessons so far have been about removing, protecting, discerning, and building, but the next 4 go further. They're the ones the Stoics saved for the people who were actually ready to hear it. Lesson 7. Virtue over loyalty. This is a hard pill to swallow, because everything we've talked about, guarding your goals, practicing private discipline, holding your boundaries without explanation, letting results speak, refusing to feed the noise. All of it points to a single destination, a self that is genuinely self-sufficient. Not in a cold, disconnected way, not in the way of someone who has simply stopped caring, but in the way of someone who has found, through discipline and silence and private work, that their interior life is so rich, so grounded, so alive, that the external approval they used to chase starts to feel like a poor substitute for something they already have. Seneca called it receding into yourself. Recede into ipsum quantum potes. Withdraw into yourself as much as you can. This wasn't a prescription for loneliness. It was an invitation to discover that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with your own mind. And that relationship, like all meaningful relationships, requires privacy to deepen. Think about the people in your life you most genuinely respect, not the ones who perform their confidence, not the ones who narrate their virtues, the ones who simply are, the ones whose presence carries weight because it isn't auditioning for anything. They walk into a room and you sense, almost immediately, that they have nothing to prove. Not because they've given up, but because they've arrived. They've done the interior work. They've sat with themselves long enough, in enough silence, through enough private difficulty, that they no longer need the room to confirm who they are. That is where these lessons lead. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't come from reading one more article or watching one more video. It comes from practice, from choosing, again and again, the quiet move over the announced one. From sitting with the discomfort of being misunderstood rather than over-explaining. From letting your work accumulate in silence until it becomes undeniable. From honoring your own time as the irreplaceable resource Seneca knew it was, and refusing to spend it on noise that costs you more than it gives. And here's what nobody warns you about. When you actually start doing this, when you genuinely begin to move through your life more quietly and with more intention, the people around you will notice before you do. Not because you've become more impressive, because you've become more real. There's an authenticity that lives on the other side of performance. A quality that cannot be faked, cannot be manufactured, cannot be purchased with the right caption or the most carefully curated image. It is the authenticity of someone who no longer needs to convince you of anything, who has decided that their life is the argument, and the argument speaks for itself. This is what the Stoics understood, and what modern culture keeps forgetting. The most powerful version of you is not the one that the world sees most. It's the one that the world feels. You feel it in the person who keeps their word without reminding you they kept it. You feel it in the leader who acts before they speak. You feel it in the friend who shows up without announcing they showed up. Presence without performance. Integrity without advertisement. Strength without spectacle. Lesson 8. The art of letting go. Musonius Rufus taught that we must practice losing things so we do not fear it. Apply this to people. Practice the idea that anyone can leave at any time, and you will be okay. This isn't cynicism, it's preparation. When you stop clinging, you stop suffering. Lesson 9. No explanation needed. You owe no one a thesis on why you chose yourself. A boundary stated clearly is complete. That sentence sounds simple, almost blunt, but it cuts directly against one of the deepest habits people carry, the belief that refusal must be justified, softened, defended, or made palatable to others. From a young age, most people are trained to explain themselves excessively, to cushion every decision with context, emotion, and apology, as if choosing their own limits is an accusation against everyone else. So when someone says no without a story attached, it feels jarring, it feels rude, it feels incomplete. But that discomfort does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the listener was expecting access they were never entitled to. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it language. Epictetus was relentless on this point. You are responsible for your own choices, not for managing the reactions they provoke. The moment you begin explaining a boundary beyond what is necessary, you quietly shift responsibility. You stop standing on your decision and start negotiating it. Explanations invite debate. Justifications invite judgment. Emotional backstories invite manipulation. A clear boundary, delivered calmly, closes the door before any of that begins. Most people don't over-explain because they are polite. They over-explain because they are afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of disappointing others, afraid of appearing selfish, cold, or ungrateful. And that fear is exactly what keeps them trapped in situations they've already outgrown. When you feel compelled to explain yourself, you are often seeking permission, not understanding. You are hoping the other person will validate your choice, so you don't have to fully own it alone. The Stoic lesson here is uncomfortable but freeing. You do not need permission to act in alignment with your values. Consider a simple, everyday example. You decline an invitation because you are exhausted, overstimulated, or simply uninterested. A boundary sounds like, "I won't be able to attend." An explanation spirals into, "I've had a long week, work has been stressful, I haven't been sleeping well, and I just need some time to recharge." The first statement is complete. The second opens space for rebuttal. Suddenly, you're told you'll feel better if you go, that everyone is tired, that you're overthinking it. Your boundary dissolves because you turned it into a discussion. The unbothered person avoids this trap not by being harsh, but by being precise. They state their decision and stop talking. This precision is not cruelty. It is respect for yourself and for reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote repeatedly about acting according to reason without attachment to applause or approval. A boundary does not need to be emotionally persuasive to be valid. It only needs to be true. When you explain excessively, you are no longer acting from reason. You are acting from anxiety about how your choice will be received. There is also a subtle power dynamic at play. When you explain yourself, you place the other person in the role of evaluator. You hand them your reasoning and wait, consciously or not, for their verdict. When you state a boundary plainly, you remove that role entirely. There is nothing to approve or disapprove of. There is only a fact. This shift unsettles people who are accustomed to having influence over your decisions. That discomfort is not your responsibility to resolve. A useful way to think about boundaries is this. If your reason is solid enough to guide your behavior, it is solid enough to stand without commentary. You do not explain gravity. You do not justify hunger. You do not defend the need for sleep. You simply act accordingly. The more you align your boundaries with your actual needs instead of social expectations, the less explanation they require. Over time, you will notice something important. The people who respect you adjust quickly. The people who don't were relying on your over-explaining to bypass your limits. This lesson becomes especially critical with emotionally reactive or manipulative individuals. Explanations are their entry point. They dissect your words, search for inconsistencies, appeal to guilt, obligation, or shared history. A clear boundary deprives them of leverage. "I'm not available for that" leaves no opening. "I can't because" invites pressure. The Stoic approach is not to argue better, but to disengage earlier. There is also an internal benefit to this discipline. Every time you state a boundary without explaining, you reinforce trust in yourself. You teach your nervous system that it is safe to choose yourself without justification. That trust accumulates. Decision-making becomes cleaner. Guilt weakens. Resentment fades. Because resentment is often the byproduct of boundaries you never enforced clearly. Choosing yourself does not require theatrics. It does not require moral speeches or emotional displays. It requires quiet consistency. A boundary stated clearly is not incomplete. It is finished. Anything added after that is for someone else's comfort, not your integrity. And integrity, in the Stoic sense, is not about pleasing others. It is about remaining aligned with what you know to be necessary. Lesson 10. Walking away as an act of love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to remove yourself from their life so they can no longer use you to avoid their own growth. And the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to allow it. So here's the invitation. Not a challenge, not a prescription, an invitation. Choose one relationship, one connection, one obligation that you have been carrying, and start setting a boundary instead. Don't share it, don't post about it, don't use it as social currency. In your next conversation, just act. Quietly, consistently. Let it live in the private space where real things grow, and watch what happens, not just to the relationship, but to you, to your focus, to your relationship with your own discipline, to the quality of your silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in private, for no audience. Confine yourself to the present, not to the announcement of the future, not to the performance of the past, the present work, the present choice, the present moment of becoming. That's where your power lives, not in the explanation, not in the justification, not in the applause, in the quiet, consistent, private act of becoming someone who no longer needs any of those things. Stop explaining your life. Build it instead. If this resonated with you, if something within you recognized the power of moving quietly and building without an audience, let me know in the comments. My peace of mind is not negotiable. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. What we are building here, lesson by lesson, is a life that does not need to be explained.